Hello and a very warm welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma. Joining me is Professor Pant. On this episode of the Ideas Factory, we will continue to discuss Ukraine and the crisis that is there because the standoff continues and there is a sharp line between Europe and Russia. We do not know what is the way ahead right now because the talks have not been very fruitful. Along with that, we'll also look at China and Xi Jinping speaking at Davos, the Chinese policy, the Chinese doublespeak, China constructing a bridge again, which India considers illegal. So all that we are going to look at on this episode of the Ideas Factory. A very warm welcome to you, Harsh. And I would like to begin this conversation by your analysis on what's going on the Ukraine front. The problem continues, the standoff continues. Ukraine is a flashpoint between Russia and the West, and UK now accuses Russia of the threatening behavior, and hence UK has sent arms for self-defense for Ukraine. That's what UK calls. Russia is very adamant. About 100,000 troops are already there in Ukraine, and Russia is adamant that Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO. So all this is going on, and we see a sharp line dividing the two. All these talks have not really brought out any result. What is the role of the US now? It's more between Europe and Russia. So what can US do here? These are big challenges for Joe Biden.
Thanks, Naghma. It's quite interesting because it's quite, the way things are unfolding in Europe. It's quite reminiscent of the Cold War, heydays of Cold War, where it was the Soviet Union and America actually fighting over Western Europe. Now, of course, the landscape is much wider, and Ukraine has become the battleground on which some of these geopolitical concerns are playing out. Of course, last week, there were three sets of conversations between Russia and the US, Russia and NATO, Russia and OSCE, and none of them actually resulted in much. And the challenge, I think, remains as it is, because the fault lines are quite sharply drawn, and the distance that the two sides have between their own perception of the problem has not been bridged at all. Now, of course, in the last few days, we are hearing very serious concerns being raised both by the White House and by European capitals that that a big crisis, if not a full-fledged war, is on its way. And then Russians, of course, denying that and then saying that, look, we are doing what is important to stake out our positions. Now, I think fundamentally the challenge is a geopolitical one, and whether in this in the 21st century one can go back to this old idea of spheres of influence that Russia seems insistent it wants to maintain, and the question is whether Ukraine's fate will be decided by Moscow and European capitals, or by Ukrainians themselves, or by Ukraine itself. And that is, I think, a big challenge because Russia, of course, is insisting that under no conditions can Ukraine be allowed to join NATO. But I think what is interesting is what Russia is doing is it is also generating anxiety in Europe, and countries like Finland and Sweden. There is this, again, a talk is emerging of whether these countries that have not joined NATO, that are not members of NATO, should join NATO once again. And of course, then there is UK, which is now stepping up and saying that, look, we are willing to provide some basic weapons systems, basic anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. And of course, UK has been also doing some training for Ukrainian forces for some time, ever since the Crimean crisis. So I think the questions remain unresolved, and whatever happens going forward, it's very clear that Russia has an upper hand at the moment, because it's largely they who are going to decide which way the cookie crumbles.
Yes, of course. And Harsh, do you think it's a very tricky situation for also countries like Germany, who seem to be doing a bit of a freelancing here, because the rest of the West seems to be, actually portrays to be united as far as Kremlin is concerned, but it's a test for the new Chancellor Olaf Scholz too, and some conversations have started between Germany and Russia. And do you think this Stream 2 pipeline can be used as a geopolitical weapon here?
I think it's in some ways it's already being used, Naghma, because EU has is, despite all the concerns that are emanating from European capitals, Europe has still to come out with a coherent set of response to this challenge, and all the heavy lifting is being done by Washington, and Washington would certainly like Brussels to come out with a united policy. But as we know, its foreign policy in European Union is a very tricky business, and Germany, in particular, as the point that you mentioned, is not at all keen that a conflict between Russia and West escalates, or that Russia is targeted, because there are clear economic there is a clear economic angle, and there is an angle about gas and energy supplies from Russia, which at this critical time in Europe, when it's the high tide of winter, the inflation is already very high. I don't think countries are European capitals would like any attempt to ratchet up the pressure, but clearly, I think things are unfolding at a faster pace than perhaps the ability of European capitals to manage at the moment. And Washington would be very keen that they come up with a position. Let's also remember that Washington itself, or Joe Biden administration itself, is facing a very, very critical choice exactly at the time when they should be celebrating 1 year in office. And this is one of the trickiest challenge on the foreign policy front that the Biden administration is facing today, at a time when its own credibility domestically is going down. Biden's opinion polls are terrible, and I think the polarization is immense. So I think the ability of West to stand up to this challenge also remains an open question at this point. So clearly, there is certainly there would be a desire on the part of Washington and certain European capitals to put up a united front, but operational challenges in putting up that united front are very, very visible.
Of course, there are operational challenges in putting up a united front, and now that the UK has been sending arms. For self-defense for Ukraine, and Russia is very adamant on its position of not letting Ukraine or Georgia join NATO. You think this situation there is in fact deteriorating, and it can lead to do more tension, or more like a warlike situation there? Now arms coming in, and Russian troops are also guarding Ukraine. There could be the chances of conflict go up in this kind of a situation.
Yes, I think what is striking is that diplomacy is being pursued, but both sides are keeping their powder dry. And both sides, of course, we have 100,000 troops, Russian troops surrounding Ukraine, and we have UK saying that, look, we are going to go ahead with supporting Ukraine to a limited extent militarily. Through weapon supplies, or and training that they have been doing for a long time now in Ukraine. I think that the question would be whether whatever measures or whatever the steps Moscow takes next, how would the West respond? Because the choices are not that many. Either you sanction Russia, which is something that West has threatened, and of course threatened that sanctions would be so extreme that that the consequences for Russia could be devastating, or you ratchet it up militarily, for which there won't be much appetite. Now, let's also remember that I think a long, drawn-out military conflict is also not in the interest of Moscow and Mr. Putin. He's also facing his own sets of challenges domestically. If there is a crisis in which his forces are drawn into Ukraine, that's not something that he would like. But he has other means. We have already seen cyber attacks. We have already seen misinformation campaigns being run. So there are other elements of this in this gray zone era of warfare, where Russia can do certain things, which will make it incumbent upon the West to retaliate. And that retaliation would then mean that there will be an escalation ladder, which both sides will have to climb quite rapidly. And in such a situation, conflict becomes a very likely possibility.
Absolutely, Harsh. And when you talk of conflict and escalation back home, let's look at what China is doing. Once again, China is constructing a bridge across the Pangong, and it's very evident by satellite pictures which are out there very clearly. They're continuing with the construction even during this harsh winter months. You can see snow-covered land, and the construction is going on. Now, the question is, of course, India says it's illegal, the construction that's going on. It's the same area where the standoff took place. Now, how significant is this action by China? Is this construction of a bridge by China in the wider conflict? In case of a war-like scenario, how does it alter the game? Or do you think, is it a stepping stone towards infrastructure or further infrastructure encroachment?
Yes, I think it is. It is an attempt by China, which it has been doing now for quite a while, to gradually change, the facts on the ground, to gradually alter the topographic realities, and that is something that inch by inch salami slicing that it does has led us to this position where, much like in other areas of conflict, we are seeing the same pattern being repeated along the LAC. It is also interesting that that this is something that is happening along the Bhutanese border, where we are seeing now increasing construction by China, which Bhutan considers an area which is disputed. So clearly, I think all around the LAC we are seeing infrastructure reinforcement and a clear message by China that that this is this dispute, that this conflict, that this border row will is a long-term one, and India should be prepared for it. I think the other fact that we have to also acknowledge is that this is a very important year in Chinese calendar, political calendar. Xi Jinping's Xi Jinping is likely to be crowned emperor this year for life, formally. We know that he has already attained that position. But I think for him to showcase a certain sense of strength globally, that what he's doing and what he's trying to do with his with Chinese neighbors is being done on Chinese terms and conditions, is going to be a very important hallmark of his leadership, both for the domestic audience as well as for global interlocutors. So I don't think, even if you look at it from the domestic political angle, it's very unlikely that there is going to be a possibility of de-escalation this year, because throughout the year, as the National People's Congress, as we move towards the National People's Congress and Xi Jinping's coronation, in some ways, we are likely to see such provocations more and more, and we are likely to see Xi Jinping positioning himself as the best guarantor of Chinese security to his domestic audience. And I think that is something that not only India but the world should be prepared for. That these are going to be a few very turbulent months ahead, and perhaps even a year.
Absolutely. You're saying it's going to be not only turbulent months, but a turbulent year ahead, because Xi Jinping is positioning himself in a certain way for his domestic audience, and he will be actually formally crowned the emperor. But it's all, we understand it's all the positioning, and China will escalate this way. But how big a concern should it be for India, considering if this is happening now? I'm talking about the construction of the bridge across the lake. It gives Chinese soldiers or the Chinese forces the ability to quickly mobilize soldiers to either side of the lake. I mean, earlier they had to take a much longer route, and if this construction happens, that route, that distance is cut down by some 150 kilometers. So that definitely makes them stronger, gives them the ability to mobilize faster. So this should be a big concern for India, right? And the India-China standoff that we had seen earlier in February 2021, this has been a flashpoint. So do you think it's significant? India needs to worry about it? India needs to do something about it?
Yes, I think every the kind of reinforcement, both infrastructural reinforcement as well as military operational reinforcement that we have seen along the LAC on the Chinese side, is, as I said, is a sign that Chinese are not willing to back down, and gradually they are trying to gain, operational flexibility, so that when the time comes, they are able to mobilize as quickly as possible. And that is something that we are seeing in the way they are approaching reinforcements along the LAC, the way where they are constructing settlements, the way they are building infrastructure. And I think that's quite evident. For India, the challenge is that, of course, India will mobilize, and India will expedite the infrastructure development on its side of the border to gain similar kind of operational flexibility. But I think the challenge is that given given the long-term disparity between the two countries, it is going to be a long haul for India before it can match infrastructure to infrastructure, or dollar to dollar investment. But I think what India can do, and is perhaps is trying to do, is to gain local superiority, where there are flashpoints along the LAC, to make sure that Chinese forces are deterred if they decide to become more adventurous. Now, whether that succeeds or not remains to be seen, but I think under the present circumstances, that is a sensible option. And also the fact that India continues to it is interesting that what we are, although the core commanders, meeting
Yeah,
regularly
continue.
has not yielded any benefits so far, apart from one disengagement that we saw last year.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that the two sides continue to deliberate on it is a fact that I think both sides see. That there is something positive to come out. That there's something positive about continuous engagement, because this is certainly a question that for both China and India is a question not simply about the boundary, but it is also about the larger scope of the relationship. The relationship is stuck, and both sides know it. And both sides also know that they need to find a way of breaking the logjam. It's just that I think at the present moment, the incentive structure domestically and structurally is such that it does not take you towards finding any solutions. Rather, it makes the positioning harder. But I think there is a real challenge that, as we try to struggle with this logjam, a small crisis along the LAC can escalate to a level where the policymakers may find it difficult to control the escalation.
Sure. And what is happening here, the construction and the salami slicing that China does, all that we see. But then you look at what Xi Jinping spoke at Davos, and there have been many tweets and there have been many comments about his doublespeak at Davos, Harsh. He calls for peace while threatening neighbors. He threatens catastrophic consequences if confronted. He challenges he talks about the challenges that the world faces due to COVID-19 pandemic, and yet he is so reluctant to actually go for the source and investigate the source. So the doublespeak was at its best when we see Davos.
Yes, I think Davos has become a platform where where perhaps the fault lines in the Xi Jinping ideology become very stark, because there he's trying to attract global investors to China. And yet at the same time, I think he's firmly focused on his domestic audience. And as I was suggesting, this year in particular, there is no way that he will back down on any of the things that he has long articulated about China's role, historical role in the world, China's civilizational destiny. And I think all of that is embedded in the way he looks at his own role in shaping China's future course. So clearly, I think even as he rhetorically wants peace, he's very clear that the peace will have to be on his own terms. Even as he wants global investors to come and invest in China, he's very clear that it has to be on Chinese terms and conditions. Even as he wants greater equality, which is a sensible move domestically, it is very clear that it has to be on the terms and conditions of the Chinese Communist Party. So I think the fault lines, I think the speech was interesting because it exposed a number of the vulnerabilities in China today. That look, here is a country that wants to become a global leader, yet the language it uses is that of a schoolyard bully. Here is a country that wants to, ameliorate domestic economic inequalities, but the way it is going about it is wiping off a lot of wealth within the country itself. So I think, in some ways, those are the vulnerabilities for China, and those are the vulnerabilities that China faces as it tries to assume the role of a global leader. But that's where we are in I think, in the evolution of China as a global leader, and this is something that I think we'll all have to live with for a while, till such time as as China and the world do not find an equilibrium to deal with each other.
All right. So evolution of China as a global leader is still happening, while it uses the language of a schoolyard bully. Very nicely you put it there, Harsh. Can we take a question here, which is actually connected to the Ukraine crisis? And one of our viewers have sent a question. Anand Sangameshwaran, he asks, do the usual suspects have a role in the Kazakhstan crisis? And if so, was it a ploy to deviate Russian focus from Ukraine, though temporarily?
See, certainly, I think, for the West, or for for major Western countries, it would be useful if Russia is distracted. But I think it would also be remiss if we don't look at the domestic reasons for what is happening in Kazakhstan. While certainly, there is a role for external actors in countries like Kazakhstan, but the questions that I think Kazakh citizens have raised during their protests, which have now come under control by and large, are valid ones, and they have been part of this of I think the domestic discourse for quite some time. There is also the question of the succession of leadership in Kazakhstan. We know that Nazarbayev's legacy lives on, and there is a lot of tension between the present leadership and what Nazarbayev represents. So I think in some ways, the leadership crisis in Kazakhstan, the economic crisis in Kazakhstan, the social and political disruption in Kazakhstan also have a lot to do with the present situation in Kazakhstan. Now, of course, if you are an external power and you want to use that to exploit the situation, you would use that to your advantage. Why not? But I think ultimately the questions and the resolution should be found within Kazakhstan itself. At the moment, clearly Russia has shown that it is Russia that wields the clout in Central Asia as far as the Kazakh situation is concerned.
All right. So I hope Anand's question is answered there. And before we close, Harsh, a very quick comment and a look at the India-UK FTA. What are the hopes that we have from that free trade agreement? There have been talks of interim trade agreement already in the fields of trade, economy, investment. So we have a lot to look forward to as far as India-UK is concerned.
Yes, I think both sides launched formally this past week their negotiations for the FTA, which has long been pending, and as Britain looks at a larger global role in the Indo-Pacific, and as India tries to reconfigure its response to FTAs and the larger global economic environment at a time of great economic disruption, I think this partnership makes eminent sense, and hopefully we will see some kind of an interim agreement soon, because both sides are pursuing other such agreements with other nations as well, and there is a new momentum in finding a resolution to some of the most critical issues that were actually impediments to finding a resolution. So in moving to the FTA. So I think that new momentum should allow India and the UK to conclude an interim agreement quickly, if not a full FTA, that they are hoping. But eventually, it would be good if the two sides do conclude a full free trade agreement. But in the short term, perhaps it looks as if the interim agreement is the way to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Harsh, for that conversation and the analysis and making us understand the context of things. Thank you so much. We will see you next week on Ideas Factory, and do send in your questions. We shall try to answer one or two questions in our coming episodes as well. Thank you for watching.